The following podcast is brought to you by the Station of the Cross. Thank you for listening.
Something that Pope Francis has talked a lot about and has called our consciences to accountability for is the sins of omission.
Everybody should not give a dime to all of these bad bishops. Make sure that all of your money goes directly into the hands of good orders and good activities, but never throw it into a general pot.
I think Bishop Chaput and Morlino were absolutely right to call for the synod to be canceled, but unfortunately it plowed ahead.
This has to be renewed in seminary life because of the dominant culture, which doesn't recognize chastity any more than it recognizes charity.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, friends, let's wrap up the week with a contentious topic. We will address this question: does mass migration mean lower wages? Our guest today is Matthew O'Brien, who is the Director of Research for an organization called FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Matthew O'Brien, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you for having me on, Father.
Matthew, this is, as I said, it's a contentious topic. It's also a politically charged topic, so I find myself obliged at the beginning of the show to say that my opinions are just that, my own, and I am not in any way implicitly or explicitly endorsing any candidate, any political party, any politician, or any particular policy. I'm just an honest man looking for information to help our listeners form conscience. Can you give us a little bit of your background? What makes you qualified to talk about these things today?
Sure. So I am an attorney. When I got out of law school, I started working for the then Immigration and Naturalization Service. I left there for a while and had a career of about 6 or 8 years in private practice, representing people in all kinds of immigration cases. And then after the September 11th terrorist attacks, as they were forming the new Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement was trying to hire people with experience in immigration law. So I went to work as a trial attorney for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I eventually moved over to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and ultimately wound up running their national security program. I was looking for a new challenge, and a job came open at FAIR, and I came over here to FAIR, which is a 501c3 nonprofit public education organization, and what we do is try and educate the public and legislators on immigration issues. And we are not anti-immigrant. We're not haters. We simply think that immigration is a rule of law issue, and we approach it accordingly.
I think that's important to say, because in some circles, and especially in certain church circles, if you're not wildly uncritically enthusiastic about open borders, somehow you're a hater or a racist or a bigot, and that's unfair. I think among intelligent, honorable people, there shouldn't be any forbidden topics. We should look at the evidence and make our judgments accordingly. What are the basic principles that your organization runs by? What's your standard for saying this is a good policy, or or we recommend this because of X, Y, or Z?
Sure. So what we recommend is that legal immigration be reduced to more normal historic levels. After the enactment of the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, the number of people immigrating each year has grown, and we're now admitting about 1 million people for lawful permanent residence each year to the United States. So if you stop and think about that, that's a large-sized American city being admitted to the U.S. every year. So we believe that we should reduce immigration to the more historical levels of between 300 and 500,000. And then we believe that for national security and economic reasons, we need to the extent that we can, eliminate illegal migration to the United States.
Does your organization take any position as to how illegal migration might be controlled?
We do. A number of different positions. First of all, we think that there has been a problem with enforcing our immigration laws. Successive presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have selectively ignored immigration laws that they didn't like in order to pander to perceived political constituencies. That's not how government is supposed to work in our republic. It's Congress that sets the immigration laws. We also believe that we need a physical barrier on the southern border, and we're very strong fans of a system called E-Verify, which is a free online system that the federal government maintains, which allows employers to verify whether individuals that they are hiring are lawfully present in the United States and authorized to work here.
Is E-Verify something that's optional for employers or required of employers?
At this point, it's kind of a hodgepodge throughout the United States. A number of states have made it mandatory for all employers. Several states have made it mandatory for employers doing business with the state government. Unfortunately, Congress has not made it mandatory for the entire United States, which it could do under its power to regulate immigration.
Okay. And what about these sanctuary cities, and I think New Jersey's trying to become a sanctuary state. Where do they fit into the mix, and what's your organization's view on the sanctuary movement?
Well, our view is that the sanctuary movement is something that's completely and utterly illegal under the Constitution. We have a federal form of government, which means that there are certain powers that are assigned to the federal government, and immigration is one of those. So state and local entities are not in a position to say that they do not wish to obey the immigration laws. And if you think about that, it's really a frightening proposition. What is it about immigration that makes it different that these government entities believe that they can disobey it? And what will be next?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard analysts ask, why is it that illegal immigrants get a pass and not bank robbers or drug smugglers, for example? Why is it that illegal immigration seems to get, in some circles at least, a kind of diplomatic immunity, if you will? Matthew, another analysis I've heard, a catchphrase from certain quarters of the media, is they say, well, if you let us have a border, we wouldn't need a wall. You didn't let us have a border, and that's why we need the wall. Could you unpack that statement for us, please?
Sure. Honestly, I have never quite understood the logic behind that. I mean, the fact is that a border is an imaginary line in the sand.
Right.
And if people are crossing it, then you need to have some kind of obstruction of people crossing or some form of control so that you can tell who is entering the country and who you need to keep out. And that's just a basic safety and security issue. If you think about it, you go home at night, you find two guys you don't know in your house. You don't invite them to stay, offer to pay for college, and feed them for the next 25 years. What you do is you call 911 and ask to have them removed. And really, if you think about the border, America is our house, and people who are coming from other countries without authorization are trespassing. And they're also creating a huge line for people who are trying to obey the laws in other places where there are large numbers of people trying to come to the U.S., like the Philippines, India. And so this notion that somehow we can do something other than a wall is very impractical. You could theoretically station a Border Patrol agent every couple of hundred yards along the border. You could theoretically use electronic means, but the problem is we've tried a lot of those things and they don't work. So it just makes much more sense to put up a physical barrier which allows the Border Patrol to become proactive rather than reactive.
Matthew, in my teaching days, whenever we would look at a public policy, I'd always ask my students the question, cui bono, Latin for, to who benefits, who's good. In other words, follow the money. What are some of the payoffs from the vantage point of say, certain types of politicians to have a more porous attitude towards the borders?
Well, I think one of the things that's driving this right now is the Democratic Party has taken a lean leftward. And you have a lot of people who are trying to come to the United States that are coming from countries that have sort of had flirtations with socialism, where the government is responsible for caring for everyone. I think that many of the Democratic politicians want people with that kind of mindset in the United States because they believe that after they naturalize, they will eventually vote for the Democratic Party. Now, on the Republican side of this, you have a lot of people in industry who are business owners, who are capitalists, and who claim that either we shouldn't have borders so you can have free movement of labor capital, or just that they want a lower wage cost, and so they would prefer to have people here who are willing to work for less money. But the problem is when they're hiring illegal aliens, they're actually exploiting people because they are paying them a lower wage because they know people are illegal and they don't want to be deported from the United States, so they're willing to be quiet and work in poor conditions for less money without benefits. And frankly, that's immoral.
Well, and the irony, of course, is that a lot of folks who are arguing for porous borders seem to take, they claim to be taking the moral high ground and seem to have a monopoly on compassion. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a little shocking to me because if you suggested to many of these folks that it was appropriate to ignore other kinds of laws, the very same people would be offended if someone jumped the line in the grocery store in front of them, but somehow they think it's okay for people to come into the United States without authorization.
And then the tooth fairy or the person who waters the money tree and feeds the golden goose can just give out the free stuff for everyone to infinity. I've heard arguments of this type. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation regarding mass migration and wages, and we're going to ask the question, what is the cost of illegal immigration to taxpayers? We want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line now with us at 1-877-511-5483 or text us at the same number, 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Liturgy of the Hours is prayed 3 times a day on the Station of the Cross at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. The Liturgy of the Hours is a meditative and efficacious way to foster habitual prayer. It is the daily prayer of the Church, prayed throughout the world by priests, religious, and laity. For details about each hour and more information about the Liturgy of the Hours, visit thestationofthecross.com.
In this season of giving, there are many creative and beneficial ways that you can be generous without needing to open up your wallet. At the Station of the Cross, we'd love to receive the gift of an unwanted vehicle. Through our safe and convenient program, you can easily get rid of your old car, boat, motorcycle, RV, or truck. It's a great way to clear out space on your property and at the same time take part in our evangelization efforts. Your gift might even qualify as a tax deduction. By donating an unwanted vehicle to the Station of the Cross, you'll be supporting everything you love about Catholic radio while quickly taking care of your personal business. For more information, visit thestationofthecross.com or call 1-866-628-CARS. That's thestationofthecross.com or 1-866-628-2277. Thank you for helping us proclaim the gospel message through the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network.
In St. Faustina's diary we read, "I will spend this Advent in accordance with the directions of the Mother of God, in meekness and humility." Learn more about St. Faustina and Divine Mercy on one of our most beloved shows. Stream episodes of Divine Mercy in My Soul right on your iCatholic Radio app, or download the podcasts at iCatholicRadio.com.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Each morning, the Catholic Current sends out a short survey on the topic for today's show so that you can share your thoughts and any questions you might have. This is a great way to participate, especially if you aren't able to call in live. A few of the responses will be read over the air to add to the discussion, so make sure you sign up to receive our emailed survey at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our topic today addresses this question: does mass migration mean lower wages? Our guest is Matthew O'Brien, Director of Research for an organization called FAIR, a Federation for American Immigration Reform. So far, since the top of the hour, we've talked about Mr. O'Brien's qualifications, we've talked about the nature of his organization, and we're starting to gain some momentum on what the impact of mass migration is on the United States economically. In this segment, we're going to take a look at what the cost of illegal immigration is to taxpayers. And Matthew, we have a caller on the line right now. Mr. Padawan, welcome back to the Catholic Current.
Hello, Father. Hello, Mr. Matthew. How are you doing?
Very good.
I'm calling in. I have sort of a twofold question regarding the last segment. And so the one part of it is we know that Barack Obama is known as the deporter-in-chief, and so he did a lot of deporting of illegal migrants. And Donald Trump is trying to do the same thing. So my question is twofold. One is what do we do about this, since the problem is just not what we're doing is not working. What Barack Obama did didn't work. What Donald Trump is currently trying to do isn't working. And then the other question is basically why does Donald Trump? Why does President Trump get so much heat, so much more heat than Barack Obama does?
Well, Mr. Padawan, thank you for your questions today. Matthew, your response?
Sure. Well, first of all, Barack Obama was not the deporter-in-chief. He wanted to give that impression so that he wouldn't be criticized for not taking national security seriously. So what he did was he conflated the numbers with people who were caught near the border and returned by the Border Patrol to Mexico under the repatriation agreement that we have with Mexico, and those people never saw an immigration judge. If you look at the number of people who actually went through a deportation proceeding, he's actually got some of the lowest deportation numbers in recent decades. So I think what this comes down to is there are a lot of interests that are mitigating toward wanting people in the United States for economic reasons or for reasons of political power. And what we need to do in order to fix the problem is to actually send a clear message. The problem is that we have very functional, effective immigration laws. We just don't enforce them. And if you look, even with Donald Trump, immigration numbers were down, illegal alien numbers were down to record lows at the beginning of the Trump administration based on the message he sent during the campaign that he was going to enforce the immigration laws. As soon as he indicated that he was willing to make a deal with the Democrats to do an amnesty, the numbers jumped back up again.
Okay, so we have to be alert to the shifting of messages and how that can shift the numbers as well. Matthew, I'm sure you've heard the following statements. You know, immigrants do the jobs that Americans won't do, and that immigrants represent a net plus to the economy. You've obviously spent more time crunching the numbers than I have. What do you have to say in response to those assertions?
Sure. So I think there are no jobs that Americans won't do, but Americans expect to be paid a market wage. The primary interest for immigrants usually is not the money that they're making per se. It's the ability to be in the U.S. where they can earn currency that they can send back to the countries that they came from, and it's worth more money based on the exchange rates. Of course, you have other factors that play into it, people looking for an education for their kids and so forth, but the major driver is the remittance payments that go back to the home country. And if we look at the costs of this, there's about $116 billion of costs that we found when you take into account social services programs, criminal justice costs, excise taxes that aren't collected on money that is remitted back to home countries. That's a lot of money, and there are a lot of things that could be done for people in the United States with that money, but also in terms of foreign aid, if we were to send some of that money abroad to places that are in crisis.
So do you have a sense of how much money in remittance is being taken out of the economy and sent abroad every year?
The figures are all over the map depending upon who is doing the research, but it's at least $4 or $5 billion in taxable income.
And that's something that could be at work in investing in American families, American infrastructure, etc. Break down the cost by category. Let's start with healthcare. You gave the example of you come home and you find two people who are sitting in your living room. You don't say, "Hey, do you need to go to the dentist?" You're squinting. "Can I take you to the optometrist? That cough sounds nasty. Let me buy you some medicine." What's the impact on the American economy in terms of healthcare provisions?
It's massive. I don't have the exact figure right in front of me, but it is somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 billion. When you take into account all of the different programs and the money that is spent at both the state and the local level.
Yeah. And part of the healthcare impact, and I don't know if, I imagine it would be difficult to get hard numbers on this, but if you've got folks coming into the country and no one knows who they are or where they went, isn't there a non-trivial possibility that some folks might not be vaccinated or might be carrying infectious diseases?
It's a huge problem. We've seen that actually start to play out with the caravan just across the border in Tijuana. They have had problems with tuberculosis. They've had problems in Europe with the huge number of migrants that have recently come into Europe, with measles coming back up in Germany after it had disappeared for about 40 years. So those are definitely concerns. But the thing that it also points out is that some of these people are people who are in need of assistance. Having them come into the United States and reside in the shadows illegally frequently doesn't lead to them getting the assistance that they need. It may lead to them getting a higher wage. It may lead to them getting employed. But if you've ever gone into some of the neighborhoods and some of the housing that these people live in, the conditions are often terrible because people are in the shadows and they're afraid of being deported, and their entire existence in the United States depends on them not being discovered, because if they are, they're afraid that they'll be deported and no longer have access to the U.S. economy.
And that shadow culture and black market can incentivize unscrupulous people to exploit them. Isn't that the case?
Well, it does, and I think if you look at the agricultural industry, sort of gives the best example of that. Much of the work in agriculture is done by people who are unlawfully here, and it's done because profit margins are very, very tight in agriculture. And agricultural producers very frequently want to have the lowest cost labor that they can find. And that creates a couple of problems. It artificially depresses the wages that American workers looking to work in the ag industry would be able to get. It stifles innovation, because why spend money on expensive picking equipment if you can find people who will do the job for less money? And what people also fail to take into account is that agriculture in the United States gets about a $20 billion taxpayer-funded subsidy every year.
And let's shift the focus a little bit. How about in terms of education? You get kids show up in the public school systems, they don't speak English. I've heard reports that oftentimes a high percentage of folks who are in the country illegally might even be illiterate in their own language. What's the impact on the bottom line in the education system in the U.S.?
It's pretty significant. We've had trouble calculating hard numbers on that because of the way the data is collected. So it's difficult to say exactly how much it costs, but what it does is it triples or quadruples the cost of education in particular school systems in places like New York or Minneapolis, Minnesota, when you all of a sudden have a massive number of people who speak an unusual language and can't read or write in their own language come into a public school system, because you now have to put in place the resources for someone who speaks their language to be able to teach them to read and write in their own language. and then teach them subjects in their own language so that they don't fall behind. And then you have to approach the task of teaching them to read and write in English.
Last week we had Maria Espinoza from the Remembrance Project, an organization that advocates for families who've lost loved ones to violence committed by people who are in the country illegally. What's the cost in terms of administration of justice at the federal level and at the state level? Do you have a ballpark figure on that?
Sure. Hold on one second here. I'm trying to look at these figures. So the total federal cost, a significant portion of which is benefits programs, is about $45 billion. The total state and local costs are about $88 billion, and the total national cost, before you take out the contributions that illegal aliens make through taxes, is about $134 billion, and that comes out to $116 billion total cost. And then when you look at the state and local medical expenditures, it's about $12.1 billion. And the educational expenditures are $44.4 billion, and the welfare expenditures for social services programs are about $2.9 billion. Medical comes out to about $12.1 billion, and the state administration of justice expenditures are about $10.8 billion.
So this is an enormous price tag that American taxpayers are on the hook for. And I tell my listeners, if you go to usdebtclock.org and see the spinning red numbers, isn't it the case, Matthew, that part of what's driving these spinning red numbers for American debt is people in the country illegally absorbing services?
Yes, and it's the fact that they haven't paid into the system and then they're absorbing services. And I would actually argue that is the primary factor which is driving the debt clock. I mean, the defense budget, people tend to think of it being huge, but it generally runs between 3 and 6% of gross domestic product. When you're looking at a $116 billion cost in illegal aliens, that's only a part of the overall cost of immigration, because people who come here lawfully are able to legitimately collect all kinds of social services. And many of them come here quite legitimately under the legal system and are immediately able to access programs that they haven't paid into as well.
And I don't see a lot of that in the popular literature. The actual costs that are really coming out of somebody's pocket that we have to pay for. Like I said, it seems to be that the tooth fairy or the elves are going to come up with all this oil and gold to pay for free stuff for everyone to infinity. When we come back in our next segment, we're going to continue our conversation with Matthew O'Brien, Director of Research for FAIR, Federation of American Immigration Reform, and we're going to talk about the link between illegal immigration and wages. And we will want you to be part of this important conversation. Get on the line now and call us at 1-877-511-5483 or text us the same number at 1-877-511-5483. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern for Sermons for Everyday Living, a program that brings you real sermons from real priests on topics important to you and your faith. Visit thestationofthecross.com for details.
Prayer of Deliverance. Almighty God and Father, we beg Thee, through the intercession and help of the archangels Saint Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel, for the deliverance of our brothers and sisters who are enslaved by the evil one, from anxiety, sadness, and obsessions.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From hatred, fornication, and envy.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From thoughts of jealousy, rage, and death.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
from every thought of suicide and abortion.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every form of sinful sexuality.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every division in our family and every harmful friendship.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every sort of spell, malefice, witchcraft, and every form of the occult.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
Thou who said, Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, grant that through the intercession of the Virgin Mary, we may be liberated from every demonic influence and enjoy Thy peace always. In the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
Do you ever wonder where God is in your suffering, or what His will is for you as you struggle in the faith? Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Heart to Heart with Mother Miriam, a program to inspire you and offer solutions to many of life's challenges. Mother Miriam is a Catholic nun and convert from Judaism whose humor and holiness, along with years of theological training, bless all who are in need of encouragement and practical advice. Listen on your local Station of the Cross affiliate or on our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. That's Heart to Heart with Mother Miriam, weekdays from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. If you miss any portion of today's show or want to listen to any past episodes, click the podcast link under the Programs tab at the top of our homepage, thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Today's discussion topic is this: does mass migration mean lower wages? Our expert guest today is Matthew O'Brien, Director of Research for a group called FAIR, Federation of Americans for Immigration Reform. If you're just joining us, you should know that since the top of the hour, we have talked about that organization called FAIR, and we've talked about the effects of immigration, in particular legal immigration, on the American economy. And we saw in the last segment, bottom line, net cost of illegal immigration to the American taxpayer is $115 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars every year. In this segment, we're going to talk about the link between immigration and wages. Matthew, what happens when we have this very large influx of low-cost labor coming into the economy? What does it do to wages? What does it do to the citizens who are already here?
Well, labor, like anything else, you have to think of labor in economic terms. People are selling their skills to their employer. And so labor is a market just like any other, and it's affected by supply and demand. And so the problem that we have is when employers have a nearly endless supply of cheaper labor coming from outside the United States, that artificially depresses wages in the U.S. And from 1980 to 2000, low-skilled workers with a high school diploma saw their wages fall by about $1,800 a year. But at the other end, college graduates lost out on about $2,600 per year. And so when you think about that, that is roughly between $2,000 and $3,000 of wage loss per year, which to an average American family that's living paycheck to paycheck is a fairly significant amount.
I see that on your website here. You have an ad campaign that says, for wages to rise, immigration must fall. Can you explain that for us, please?
Sure. So much of the immigration to the United States is actually driven by people seeking jobs, but we have a strange situation where our immigration system admits people based on nepotism, essentially. About 90% of our immigration is what's called family-based immigration, where the only qualification is that you pass vetting, you're not a criminal, you're not a national security threat, and you have a qualifying relative sponsor you to come into the United States. About 10% of our immigration is employment-based, where people come here and they're sponsored by an employer. But even in that case, those are not people that are being hired to fill gaps in the U.S. economy. They're people who are being hired based on the employer's needs and desires. And so what this does is you have a lot of people whose primary interest is in being in the United States at the upper end, so they're willing to work, at least initially when they come to the United States, for a lower wage. And then you have a huge number of people coming here both legally and illegally who are at the lower end of the skill set and very frequently are willing to take jobs at significantly lower wages than your typical American high school graduate is willing to accept.
That situation in America, is that typical of immigration laws in other countries?
It's atypical. A lot of other countries have systems that are what are called merit-based systems, where you're scored on a point system based on the job skills, the language ability, your financial background, and other things that you bring to the table. The theory being that if you're going to be able to immigrate to, say, Australia, which uses a system like this, your immigration to Australia should serve the Australian public in some manner.
What a novel idea. I remember years ago a friend of mine was looking to move to Canada, and he had to demonstrate that he was making a contribution to the Canadian economy that a Canadian couldn't make, and he said, I can't teach the history of American jazz, so I guess I'm not going to Canada. Why does it seem to be ruled out of bounds that we can ask questions about people at the front door saying, so what do you bring? What do except for cost, what else do you bring? Why is that considered illegitimate?
Well, I think you have to trace this to the origins of the 1965 Immigration Act. The Democratic Party, Senator Ted Kennedy, and before that his brother when he was a senator, had linked immigration to the civil rights movement. And they had this notion that in order to live out the dream of the civil rights movement, we needed to bring lots of people from a variety of different backgrounds and ethnicities into the United States. When you stop and think about that, it's a nice idea, but as a policy prescription, it doesn't really take into account the fact that people who come to the United States and live here need to have some kind of means of support, and we want to integrate them into our societies and make them part of the American dream. And in order to do that, they need to be able to speak English, and they need to be able to do jobs that the American economy needs to have done.
You know, I've heard in some circles, at least, that if you talk about assimilation or the melting pot or learning English or cultures, etc., we get into the issues of racism or nationalism or bigotry of some sort. Does your organization take a stand and say, no, we're talking about numbers more than we're talking about race or ethnicity? Can you help us sort out? Because the conversation becomes heated very quickly, I found.
Sure, we don't talk about race or ethnicity at all. We talk about the rule of law and economics and practical things that make American government run. And I think the argument that somehow if you have a merit-based immigration system, you're not going to get people with skills and the ability to speak English is actually quite racist, because if you look at the largest groups that fit into that category, if you were going to do this based on the ability to speak English, education, and job skills, the three places where you're going to draw people from are India, the Philippines, and China. And then the other groups that you're most likely to draw from are certain countries in Africa and countries across the Caribbean. And virtually no one is Caucasian in any of those countries. So this isn't about keeping America white. It's more about keeping America functional and making sure that we don't become a failure because we overestimated our ability to provide a social safety net in the way that countries like Spain or Greece have.
When you talk about keeping America functional, is part of keeping America functional keeping America solvent?
Most definitely. I mean, that's probably the key factor. If you look at what's going on in places like Greece and Spain, the governments have become bankrupt, and it's led to all kinds of social disruption, riots in the streets, people not being able to get employment. If you look at an extreme situation like Venezuela, where they had an experiment with socialism that destroyed the successful petroleum products industry, you now have people that are literally starving to death because the government is not solvent and it can't deliver any of the basic services that people need, like water and electricity and food.
And Venezuela is a resource-rich environment with a year-long growing season. It seems counterintuitive that they've gotten to the point where they've eaten their pets and zoo animals as well. So I think that may be a cautionary tale for us. In your research, do you have a practical sense of how much have wages been suppressed by a casual attitude towards border enforcement? What is that costing the typical American worker?
Well, as I said before, if you look at the period from 1980 to 2000 when immigration started to increase significantly, the average American worker with a high school diploma lost about $1,800. The average college-educated worker lost about $2,600 per year. If you want to look at it in a different way, the LA Times ran an article a few years ago saying that construction workers in LA lost about 40% of the wages that they were making back in the 1990s due to an influx of immigrants that depressed the wage market to wages below what they were earning in the 1990s.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's an astonishing datum. Why isn't this? I know numbers are. I'm a humanities major. I'm not a big numbers guy. I'm math phobic. But why aren't these numbers better known? I don't know how one could make an intelligent, informed decision about these matters without having these numbers. Is it that you're not shouting, or that people aren't listening, or someone has a hand over your mouth? Can you help us understand what's going on here?
I think it's a combination of the latter, too. We are shouting, but I think a lot of people, when they see this, understandably feel a connection to this, since so many of us have roots in immigrant families. A significant portion of my family came from Sweden. I can still remember relatives speaking Swedish at my grandmother's house when I was a young child. So we all have a connection to this, and a lot of people somehow feel that if we react to the current global economic and security environment, we are betraying our history. But if you stop and think about that, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because one of the reasons that we have been successful is we have been able to take people in and assimilate them to a largely British-influenced culture and legal system, which has been very, very successful. But what's happening now is we're getting numbers that are too big to do that, and a lot of people simply don't want to hear that. I think the other problem is a lot of people hear numbers, and it doesn't really register with them.
Right.
And if they don't know someone who has been personally affected by this in a negative way, then the numbers really don't move them at all.
Right, that's an abstraction, and that's why I think organizations like the Remembrance Projects and the Angel Families, focusing on families who've lost loved ones to violence committed by people who are in the country illegally, has to be a part of the conversation, to take that out of the abstract as well. You know, in my own research, Matthew, I've seen this statement. It said, you can have open borders or you can have a welfare state, but you can't have both. What do you make of that statement?
I think it's 100% correct. I mean, if you're going to have a welfare state, it typically depends upon having a relatively closed environment where you have people paying into the system, and they're then going to be able to collect the money that they have paid at the back end. We have a problem in a lot of countries because legislators are not fiscally responsible, and they start poaching from those funds, and then they go looking to immigrants to make up the difference by paying into the system. But the problem is, if you're importing, neurosurgeons and anesthesiologists, you may be able to make up that difference with immigrants. But if you're importing people whose only skills allow them to work in a grocery checkout lane, and not that there's anything wrong, that's good honest labor.
No.
But the fact is that it doesn't pay a high salary, which means that people aren't paying a high amount of taxes into the funds to fund things like social safety net programs.
I'm just thinking out loud here, Matthew, and correct me if I'm in error, but it would seem to me that if an American taxpayer has an increasing tax burden to cover the cost of illegal immigration, doesn't that eventually become a disincentive for him starting a business or a family of his own?
Well, it does indeed, and what it does is it demonstrates that it really doesn't matter how much many of these immigrants are paying into the system, because the costs associated with having them here are tremendous. And I think you had mentioned the angel moms and some of the families that have lost relatives. That's an incalculable cost. We don't know how many of those people, if they were young people who were killed by people who shouldn't have been here in the first place. It could have been the person that came up with the cure for cancer, or that founded a multi-million-dollar computer empire that was going to employ thousands of people. So that's a cost that we have no way of calculating, but it's a cost nonetheless.
Right, it's a social cost. And when someone is murdered, all of that person's descendants are taken out of the pool. And that's a tremendous cost, not only to the family, but to the human community as well. We're talking about the link between mass migration and the suppression of wages. Our guest is Matthew O'Brien, Director of Research for FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. You're listening to us on the Catholic Current, and we want you to be part of the conversation. Get on the line now to join us. Call 1-877-511-5483, or if you wish, text us your contribution to the conversation by that same number, 1-877-511-5483. We want to hear from you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is Father Jacek Mazer. Please join me in a prayer to St. Francis Xavier. O great St. Francis, well-beloved and full of charity, with you I reverently adore the Divine Majesty. I beg of you to intercede for me, that I may receive the graces necessary to live a holy life and die a holy death. Amen.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for December 14th. Today we celebrate St. John of the Cross. Born in Spain in 1541, John was ordained a Carmelite priest at 25. He soon took up the work of reform, but the price was high: misunderstanding, opposition, persecution. John was even imprisoned for a time by his own religious order. Its leaders opposed his determination to observe and promote the primitive Carmelite rule, which emphasized austerity, poverty, and discipline. In prison, John came to know the cross acutely, to experience the dying of Jesus as he sat month after month in his dark, narrow cell with only his God as companion. But John also came to life in prison, spending hours uttering poetry. In the darkness of the dungeon, the mystic poet in John of the Cross flowered and was captured in his spiritual canticle. His prose masterpiece, Ascent to Mount Carmel, reveals his gifts as a psychologist theologian. Today's saint underlines the gospel paradox. The cross leads to resurrection, agony to ecstasy, darkness to light, abandonment to possession, denial of self to union with God. John of the Cross died in 1591 after a short but full life and was canonized in 1726.
The new Saint of the Day app is available now for your smartphone or tablet. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Shortly after the show, visit our page for the Catholic Current at thestationofthecross.com. You'll find a link to today's episode page where you can view Father McTague's show resources and today's podcast.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Our question today is this: does mass migration suppress wages? The short answer is yes. According to our guest Matthew O'Brien, the Director of Research for FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, so far we've talked about the net costs of illegal immigration to the United States taxpayers. It's north of $115 billion a year. The average American family is losing between $1,800 and $2,300 a year in lost wages because of the suppression of the labor rate. In this segment, Matthew, I wanted to take a look at something positive. We often hear people say, don't just bring me the problems, bring me the solutions. We don't want to leave, especially on a Friday before a holiday coming up, we don't want to leave our listeners with a sense of helplessness or despair. What's the next thing that our listeners should be doing?
Well, your listeners, if they're interested, can get involved in this issue on either side, whichever side happens to appeal to them. FAIR has two websites, fairus.org and immigrationreform.com. Both of those have information that tell people about different things that they can do to get involved in the issue. Probably the most significant thing that they can do is communicate with their legislators, both at the state, local, and the federal level, and tell their legislators how they feel. If enough people become involved in this issue, then the voices of the individual citizens start to equal those of the special interests, and that is what brings change.
Matthew, I'm a Catholic priest. I'm a member of the Society of Jesus. A lot of our listeners are Catholic. Very many are Christians. Some folks say that there is a clash between the rule of law that is essential for the life of any nation and the law of the gospel for followers of Christ. We talked about your own Christian commitment before we went on the air. Is there really a clash between being a Christian and being a citizen? Is that inevitable?
I don't think it is. I think this goes back to Jesus' admonition to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and render unto God that which is God's. And I think there's a big difference between telling people this is a legal limit that we have set versus being unkind or unchristian to people. And the fact is that if we want to be able to take care of the people who are citizens of the United States and those who we wish to bring here as immigrants, we can't continue to have an ungoverned system where anybody who manages to come here gets in, and if they go feet dry on the United States, they are able to stay, because we don't know who many of these people are. And so in an age of terrorism and strife, we need to protect our own citizens from people who would do them harm. But there's also the simple fact of we need to have order and an established border that defines where the laws of the United States apply in order to have a country. And the fact is, this country is one of the most friendly countries to Christians anywhere in the world. And if we want to preserve that, we need to make sure that we preserve the basic civil order. That doesn't mean that we can't be kind to people, but it does mean that in some circumstances we may need to be kind to people in their own countries rather than having them come here, because we only have a limited amount of food, a limited amount of water, a limited amount of space, and everyone who is disenchanted with their own situation can't simply come here. And then I think the flip side of that is, as Christians, we have a certain responsibility for our own political destiny. Many people, would not hesitate for a moment to stand up for what they believe is right based on their religion. Well, if that's true, that should transfer over to your politics as well. And if you believe as a Christian something that's being done by a government is immoral or inappropriate, you have to speak out about it. And yet we never ask why so many of these people that are coming from countries that are torn by strife haven't been able to put their own house in order before they flee and come here.
Right. Matthew, we have a caller on the line. We have Francis from Rochester, New York. Francis, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Hi. I was glad that just in the past few minutes you actually, brought our faith into the topic, because I was feeling kind of upset that I hadn't heard any leanings toward the basics of Christianity in talking about immigrants. I live in Western New York in farm country, and we have many Mexican immigrants who work here on our apple farms and dairy farms, and some of them come and go each year. Some of them have, made lives here, and the farms here in Western New York couldn't survive without the Mexican workers. And they pay income tax, they pay Social Security. They don't receive any benefits from those payments. And, and the rule of law doesn't always align with Christianity. You're talking primarily about dollars and, not helping these people assimilate. And another thing people say, oh, well,
let me interrupt there, because I think you've raised some interesting points. Thank you for your call, Francis. Matthew, your response to our caller?
Well, sure. So to the extent that people have come here legally on like the H-2A agricultural worker program, I don't have a problem with that. I think that we probably should limit those programs so that we give opportunities to American workers. But the fact is, people that are obeying the system have come here with our invitation, and we should welcome them. What I'm concerned about is people who make a decision to cut the line and come here of their own accord. And I have a lot of trouble understanding why people think that's okay, because for every one of those people, there's 100 people patiently waiting in line in the Philippines and India. And, who is to say that the people who have jumped the border and jumped the line have the right to take a space from someone else?
Right. That point is not often raised in conversation. Matthew, we have one more caller on the line. We have Bob from Buffalo, New York. Bob, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Hello, how you doing?
Good, thank you. What's your question?
My question is, when a legal immigrant is working at a business and I'm working there with them, do we pay the same tax rates?
Good question, Bob. Matthew?
Sure. That would depend upon the wages that you're being paid. If you're being paid similar wages, then you would be paying the same tax rate.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Matthew, it's a difficult situation to sort out. I mean, we see very sad pictures of, children crying and torn teddy bears and scary pictures of, Donald Trump apparently yelling at children on the covers of Time magazine. Where can we go for information to complement and maybe temper the sentimentality that this conversation usually stirs?
Sure. Well, our website is fairus.org. We have another website called immigrationreform.com. And there are a number of places. If you do a simple search on the internet, you can get both sides of the issue. The Daily Caller, which is based here in D.C., has some excellent information, as does the Washington Times. They tend to have more balanced reporting. These are difficult issues. I don't think anyone wants to see people being separated from their children. To say that that's immoral when we do it at the border, but it's perfectly appropriate when a U.S. citizen commits a crime and is arrested and therefore separated from their children isn't immoral. There's a problem there because the moral logic is not coherent.
Right. I think we have to have learn to have a well-informed and very sober conversation about immigration as a moral issue. Matthew O'Brien of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you.
I'm Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your host Monday through Friday for the Catholic Current. Listen to us weekdays 5 to 6 p.m. On Monday, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with a research journalist looking at alleged financial irregularities in the Papal Foundation. You don't want to miss that. And go to thestationofthecross.com, go to our webpage, and get on our mailing list. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God our Lord protect you from all harm and from every evil to reach the happiness of heaven. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The Station of the Cross is a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please consider making a donation. Donations can be made through our website, thestationofthecross.com, or by calling 1-877-888-6279. You can also donate right through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Thank you for listening to and supporting the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.